choose strength training because it is going to be the key to developing the stability, the motor control, and yes, of course, the strength that our autism and neurodivergent athletes need for preparing and being more independent in their activities of daily living. Yeah, Jay, getting the speed. So let's talk a little bit about strength training and why that is the predominant method that we use in autism fitness programming, because it is autism fitness, but fitness constitutes a very wide range of different activities, different exercises, different modalities. And in autism fitness programming, we really just focus on strength and on power movements. And there are some really important reasons why we do. So reason number one is generalizability. That means that the skill set that we're developing is going to carry over into other areas of life. And if we consider this from the perspective of activities of daily living, picking things up, standing up, sitting down, walking from place to place, going up and down stairs, hoisting up a heavy laundry bag, carrying grocery bags, opening a door, pushing a heavy door open, pulling something out of a cabinet. All of the things that we oftentimes take for granted throughout the day are things that are required, or things that require a certain amount of strength and motor control. One of the challenges that many autistic individuals and neurodivergent individuals face is that there is a deficit in motor control, which thus leads to a deficit in strength and stability, which thus leads to a deficit in performing some of these activities of daily living on their own without inviting some type of compensatory movement. That's where additional muscles and movement are needed in order to perform the activity. Otherwise, the activity won't get performed, and it takes way too much energy up for the athlete, and then it becomes burdensome, and then they don't want to do it, and there's a feedback loop of can't do it independently, so they don't want to do it, so there's less inclination to do it, and so more support is needed. So strength training, oddly enough, and obviously enough at the same time, leads to stronger performance in the real world. And what we do in autism fitness programming is we take the fundamental movement patterns, or the fundamental movements, pushing, pulling, carrying, squatting, hinging, and we take one, sometimes two exercises from one of these different movement patterns, and we use these as the central foundation of our programming, so that our athletes are getting stronger, so that they can exhibit and utilize those skills outside of the gym or outside of the fitness session, wherever you're running fitness sessions, all right? Because again, there are so many different modalities and so many different things that can be under the general definition of fitness, but we are talking about strength training because it is going to be highly generalizable to real life. So here's the other, the next point about strength training: body composition. Now, it is not to say, and our point is not to turn our autism fitness life skill athletes into bodybuilders. It takes a lot of focus and a lot of very specific training at a certain level of intensity and volume in order to get hypertrophy on that scale, right? Even if we're talking about natural bodybuilding, I won't even go into it, but it takes concerted effort, takes a lot of protein also, a lot of carbohydrates. The point is not to develop hypertrophy in the way that we often think of it in the zeitgeist, in general conversation about, oh, we're going to get like massively big. No, that's not the point. The point is to develop lean mass that is going to be utilized to enhance that motor control and that stability. The other thing, and this is where we talk about the aging process, is our autism and neurodivergent athletes are no less susceptible in fact, it could be argued, and the research backs this, that they are more susceptible to many of the detrimental effects of aging. One of which is atrophy, so the degeneration of muscle tissue. And what does that lead to? That can lead to falls, it can lead to balance issues, it can lead to not being able to stand up from a seated position, or needing a lot of extra support to stand up for a seated position, or not being able to get oneself down under a bed to look for something that fell down, not to grab something out of a cabinet. The development and maintenance, the sustaining of that lean muscle tissue is absolutely necessary for a higher quality of life into the 40s, into the 50s, into the 60s, into the 70s and 80s. All right? You have two 80-year-olds, one of who is very physically active, the other who stopped when they were, 15, 16, being, highly, physically active, whether it was sports or anything else. You know that there's a marked difference in those two individuals. And the same holds true for our autism population. The third thing about strength and stability is that lean mass and the strength training is also going to have a beneficial effect on emotional regulation and on cognitive functioning as well. Strength training, is it a panacea? Maybe we're not going to go that far, but it certainly has demonstrable beneficial effects, both, not just both, because we're talking about three, but for physical health, for behavioral health, for cognitive health. This is demonstrated to be true in neurotypical populations, and we can take all of this great information and carry it over to our autism and neurodivergent population. Of course, there are many more considerations in developing fitness programming, again, strength and resistance training, for this population as well, regarding motivation, regarding coaching and cueing, how we're using language. But the things that hold true for the neurotypical population with respect to strength training also hold true for the autism population. So let's talk about some other modalities and some of the perceptions and limitations as well. So the first one, this comes up a lot, is cardio. What about cardio? What about, what about running? What about heart rate? Here's the thing. There are many different forms of cardio, and then when we get into cardiorespiratory performance and cardiovascular exercise, what we want to ask is, are we talking about slow, steady, sustained cardio, kind of zone 1, maybe a little bit zone 2. There are multiple zones of cardio. So even when we say cardio as a blanket statement, we need to ask, well, what kind of cardio? Certainly, cardiovascular health is important. It's necessary to lead a long and healthy life. However, one of the things that is not often spoken about, so not often recognized, is that strength training, done well in a comprehensive and individualized program, does have a beneficial effect to the cardiovascular system. And especially when we have an athlete who's going from one exercise to a different exercise with limited rest in between, there is definitely an elevated heart rate, and that is the impetus to start sweating and breathing heavy because there is this elevated heart rate. So something that's not often spoken about because it seems like these two modalities are completely separate, but there is a beneficial cardiovascular effect from strength training. All right. What's the other issue with cardio is that it is not always going to be scalable for every individual. Let's say we have some major gait pattern issues. Let's say we have an individual who simply by way of their body shape, certainly myself is in this category, they are really not built for distance running. There is a point at which certain types of cardio are not really scalable, and we don't want some of the impact on the joints that sustained cardio can have as well. However, interestingly enough, with strength training, we can scale it. We can make it as progressed as we need to. We've all seen examples of this, people moving a lot of weight for very few reps, or people moving a moderate or even a lot of weight for a moderate amount of reps. We can scale strength training out for any age, for any ability level, when we're talking about an individual's, mobility, their flexibility, having too much or too little mobility or flexibility, we'll get to that, and for their current level of stability and motor control also. Can't always say the same thing for cardio, and the reality is, if our athletes are, and many are not, but if they're getting their steps in every day, somewhere in that 8 to 10,000 range, most of the cardiovascular exercise requirements for general health are going to be met simply through that. If someone wants to hike, if they want to bike, if they want to swim, if they want to walk on the incline treadmill for half an hour a few times a week, great, have at it. However, that cardiovascular activity is not going to develop the lean muscle tissue or the motor programming that is generalizable the same way that strength training will. So they are two different things with two different benefits. The strength training, I would argue, is going to have a more generalizable and a more robust benefit for many, many, many more individuals. And again, we have that scalability factor as well. So another term that comes up with along with another modality. So we can talk about flexibility, and flexibility is oftentimes thrown out there as a desirable physical quality. However, much like cardio, where it's not just, oh, we need cardio, and then we have to ask, what kind of cardio? Are we talking about steady state, sustained? Are we talking about getting into, zones 3 to 5 and really elevating the, the heart rate? When we talk about flexibility, which comes up a lot because it's easy to start listing out different qualities like develop strength, great, yes, and stability, great, yes, and balance. A lot of balance is genetic, but we're not even going to get into that right now. And flexibility. Well, a couple things about that. Thing number one is that many autistic individuals are already hypermobile around their joints. They have too much range of motion in their shoulders and hips, and sometimes their knees, but mostly the shoulders and hips, right? So why would we want to do flexibility training for someone who already has too much flexibility, right? We want that individual to be stronger, i.e. more stable, through a healthy range of motion. And so when the question comes up, what about stretching? What about yoga? Yoga can certainly have its benefits, but if someone, for example, needed more protein in their diet, and then they said, well, I love carrots, we could say that's great, but carrots don't provide any real usable protein. So even though it's a food, it's not supplying the thing that that individual needs, which is more protein, which they're going to get from, lean meats, eggs, milk, whey protein, whatever. These things can definitely be looked up, but those are the leaders in protein. And so to just say flexibility and, we're doing flexibility training, there is zero reason and definitely some potential problems with doing more flexibility training for someone who is already hypermobile. This should go without saying, and yet here I am saying it. So you can have a yoga program that is enjoyable. It could be calming. It could be challenging. But we have to be very careful with just giving this blanket program of, doing yoga or, doing stretching. Do we need a particular stretch for a particular reason? And coming back to strength training, again, to hype it up some more, if we are moving through a full range of motion with motor control, guess what? That's flexibility work too. So not only do we get our strength through strength training, but we get our cardio through strength training done well. I'm not going to say that every single session is going to be cardio intensive, but once our athletes get to a certain level of performance, meaning intensity or cutting down the rest periods in between exercises, or even a farmer's walk or a heavy carry, you're typically breathing pretty heavy after those. So that can definitely be considered cardiovascular work. And then we talk about flexibility, healthy flexibility that is not going to be detrimental or injury provoking through that full range of motion with motor control with a weight is as or more legitimate, meaning beneficial, than just holding a stretch for X amount of seconds. So we have to be careful about labels also, simply because something has a name, like we're calling it, yoga or flexibility training or cardio. We have to break down what exactly is actually happening, and is it to the benefit of that particular individual? What do they need? In general, most of our athletes need to be stronger in these fundamental movement patterns. And people have said to me about, certain athletes, or I've had parents say, oh, they're already really strong. And that could be the case. But can they control that movement? Can they get up and down from a chair or a toilet seat? How are they with navigating stairs? And it's not just thinking about now, but thinking about the future. How many people are in great shape in their teenage years and in their 20s, and then their 30s, they stop moving around. They stop exercising or doing whatever sport or whatever activity, and then they get to their 40s, and then they get to their 50s. So here's the thing. It needs to be consistent throughout the lifetime. It would be ridiculous. And you watching here probably wouldn't argue. It'd be interesting if you did. If you do, leave it in the comments. I'd like to have this debate. But let's say someone did 5 push-ups 12 years ago. And they said, well, I did 5 push-ups 12 years ago. I'm good. Nobody would say that. So fitness training, again, strength and resistance, needs to be something that we carry on throughout our lifetime. So it needs to be sustainable. If it's going to be sustainable, it also needs to be scalable. As I discussed earlier, we need ways to implement it for each individual so that it is both meaningful and effective. Meaningful in that there are aspects of it that the individual enjoys and is motivated to do and participate. Not even it's their favorite part of their day, which it very well might be. But even if it isn't, it's just there. They get it done. If it's, a few times a week, and the strength training is doing all the things that it needs to be doing, and it is individualized for that particular athlete so that they're getting what they need out of those exercises, out of that program. And then we need to have it over the course of time. So it needs to be continuous, because when do we no longer need exercise? When we're no longer moving. So if we want to keep moving with strength, stability, yes, flexibility too, have a healthy amount of cardiovascular performance, strength training checks off all of those boxes. It really does. But we need to implement it in a way that makes sense for each individual. So we need to have a system. We need to be able to take baseline performance so that we know what an individual can currently do within their, healthy capability, and build on that over time. And that is the way that strength training can change lives, not only for the neurotypical population, but for autism and neurodivergent populations as well. So that is why we focus 95%, because we throw in some power also. Being able to generate force, pushing open those heavy doors, throwing a heavy laundry into the washer, that needs power. So we add some power in with our medicine ball throws, sandbell slams, maybe even some big heavy rope swings, a little bit of power, a lot of bit of strength training, and that is the key to unlocking the greatest benefits of exercise. So exercise is a large umbrella, it's a large arena, and there are some things that are non-strength related that people enjoy, and that's fine. But the strength training is the foundation of everything, and we can't get around from that. I don't want to get around from that because I love it, but it's also the mechanism or the modality that's going to have the single greatest impact on the lives of our athletes. And that is why in Autism Fitness Programming, we focus on strength training. So I hope this has been helpful for you. Please like, definitely share, and subscribe so that I can bring you all the information that you want to know. And thinking of that, leave your questions in the comments section below. I love answering. That's actually my favorite thing to do because I've been doing videos for years and years and years. I want to know what you want to know because that helps me help you. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement. Thank you very much for watching.